Chris, it's all yours, brother. Come on in.
Thank you. My name is Chris, and I'm a recovered alcoholic. My sober date is September 26, 2014. My home group is All It Up Again in Baldwin, New York. I have a sponsor. I am the intergroup rep at my brick and mortar home group, and I chair and secretary a meditation meeting on Wednesday evenings on Zoom. And I am grateful to be alive and sober. So I'm in a different location geographically right now. I just came back from a little vacation with my siblings and my parents and nieces and nephews. And I came to my parents' house. And unlike 11 plus years ago, I have a key today to my parents' house. You know, I have their alarm code. They trust me. I slept in this room right over here, and I got kicked out in the room right over there too because of my disease of alcoholism. Because I could not live up to the requests, the respect that they needed, that they deserved to have. So to be able to share, to speak and share my experience, strength, and hope in this place is sacred and beautiful and very emotional. Because as the book talks about, I believe in the family afterward, our dark past is the greatest asset we have, the key of life and happiness for others. There's been a transformation that has happened. No longer do I have to live in shame and guilt about the past because I've been what the book talks about being reborn, that the old me is dead and that there's a new me that has reemerged. And to be able to be here and be present and open the door with my own key and to set the alarm, shut the alarm off with my own alarm code is a very precious gift because not because of just that, but because it means they trust me. Because they know that I'm going to respect them. They know, thank you for everyone doing service and doing reading. Derek talked about the alcoholic being a very sick person. And as Eric just mentioned, that we recovered. The book talks about recovering from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Was I seemingly hopeless? My mind and my body, 100%. On my anniversaries, I have been given an opportunity to, instead of spending that day to celebrate me and my achievements, because I know that I did not get me sober. This is not moral psychology that transformed me, that yet but a power greater than myself. I use that day to give back, to give thanks to the people that have helped me, that planted seeds in my recovery, whether it's going to my very first AA meeting that I've ever been to, whether it's, every year that I celebrate, I call a number of people that help to transform my life, that help to set things in motion. And one of the people has been my best friend since third grade. He's not an alcoholic. Uh, him and I were just talking a few days ago. He's been 2 years abstinent. He chose not to drink anymore. Drinking was a problem and he chose to stop drinking, and we were laughing and I was asking him questions and like why, what was the reason? He's like, Chris, I kind of saw the path that I was on and it scared me, so he can choose not to drink out of fear. And the book talks about the moderate drinker, the hard drinker, and the real alcoholic. And it says that this hard drinker, if they have a sufficient enough reason, ill health, falling in love, warning of a doctor, becomes operative. This person can stop or moderate their drinking. And I called him because, on September 26th, he gets to give me my 11-year coin. And I'm grateful to that. And one year I called him on my anniversary and I thanked him and I told him how he influenced my life and how he influenced my recovery and the fruit that has borne from the disease of alcoholism, because now I'm a recovered alcoholic. Now I have work to do. Now I have people to help. I get to use my experience to benefit others. And he reminded me of a time in which he picked me up at my apartment. And this is in the midst of active alcoholism, and he drags me out of bed, and I vaguely remember this, but he explained a story in which he got me out of bed and he brought me to like a convent, like to a church that was close to where I lived, and I didn't really remember this experience too much. The book talks about having hazy recollections, and I said to him, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Chris," he said, he's like, "Well, I woke up a pastor to take your penance." And in confusion, I asked him why he did that. And he said, "Chris, for years I was trying to help you get better. At that point, I was trying to help you die more peacefully. You know, I was seemingly hopeless, My friends and my family distanced themselves from me, not because they didn't love me, but because the pain of watching me suffer from this disease was too hard for them to bear. And and that's what this disease was doing to me. The book talks about, we're in the midst of progressive illness, we get worse and never better. And that was my experience with the disease of alcoholism over a period of time, and when they talk about the moderate drinker, the hard drinker, and the real alcoholic, it says the real alcoholic may not always be a continuous drinker. They may start off as a moderate drinker, that there's a progression that happens. And if I look back at my drinking career, I love how the program calls it a drinking career. Because most people, if you ask them about their drinking career, they would look at you as if, you're crazy because drinking is not a career. But if I look at my alcoholism, drinking was 100% a career. It was something I did regularly. It was something that was fundamentally important in my life. And and when I look back at my drinking career, I saw at different stages of my drinking in which I was drinking to party and I was drinking to have fun and I was drinking because that's what we do. And then I could look at different stages of my life, particularly halfway through college, and I saw that I did not have power, choice, or control. I could look back at it and I could see where the amount of which I drank, the frequency of my drinking, the inability to stop or moderate started to dissipate, and I was no longer choosing to drink, but the drink was choosing me. I had no power, no choice, and no control. I was drinking because I'm an alcoholic, because I crossed over that invisible line that they talk about, in which now I've lost power, choice, control. Lack of power was my dilemma. And at that time, halfway through college, everything started to get worse. The blackouts were frequent, if not regular. Fighting was a regular part of my life. There was no partying, there was just drinking. It was just a continuation. My non-alcoholic friends, they saw me at night, but they didn't see what I was doing throughout the day, at least for the time period in which we stayed together. My fraternity brothers were telling me that I had a drinking problem, and that was concerning because yeah, in my fraternity, all you did was drink and go to the gym, and they're telling me that I have a drinking problem. Because when I look back at it, they had a shutoff valve that I did not have. Um, DWs were part of my story. Um, it was getting bad. Depression, anxiety, panic attacks. I was self-mutilating. The book talks about grave emotional mental disorders. I was self-mutilating. I was burning myself, maybe just to feel. My family knew as early as I recall by about sixth grade that there was something going on with me. I'm very fortunate enough to have a lot of wonderful people in my life that have offered support, knowing that there was something going on. They didn't know what it was, but they knew it was something going on. And I'd seen psychotherapists from middle school up until even current day. I'm seeing one. And and during my alcoholism, I was seeing therapists, and during the process and during the journey, and I wanted to say this that I'm grateful for this opportunity to have seen a therapist, to see many therapists. I saw about five in total. Um, because I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about stuff that happened to me. As a result of therapy, I learned about being molested as a child. I didn't remember it happening, but probably a year or two into my therapy, I just had these visions and these memories started coming back about being molested as a little kid. I remembered, I started to realize the effect that being adopted. I was adopted from the country of Colombia. I was born, I was given to a foster family for 4 months, and then my foster family gave me to my adoptive family, my family here. And my parents would put us to sleep with a bedtime story about two kids that were given to loving parents, and how fortunate they were and how they were chosen, and I had a very fluffy, loving memories of this and recollections and stories about our adoption process. But I knew deep down inside, I think subconsciously, it put a lot of tear on me emotionally. And through that therapy process, I learned a lot about myself. And I guess if I look back at my drinking, I thought like, well, if you went through what I went through, you would drink how I drank. I thought that I was a type of drinker that was drinking not because of any other reason, but because maybe to how to deal with stress and how to deal with, the trauma that I experienced. Graduating college by the skin of my teeth, I had my first experience of that whole lack of power concept came from going to an outpatient treatment. You see, I had my first child. Her name is Bella. And I remember holding Bella for the first time. And I remember saying, like, I'm gonna stop drinking for her because I knew I was not equipped to be a father to this child if I continued drinking. So I decided to go to an outpatient treatment program and I stayed there for a month and I graduated and then I drank again. That same night that I graduated. The same night that my dad patted me on the back and said, I'm so proud of you. I knew you could do it. You're a strong-willed young man. I picked up a drink. And I would love to tell you that there was a reason that I picked up a drink, but there wasn't. Nothing bad happened, nothing good happened. I just did it. And just like the book talks about, hitting yourself on the bar, saying, how did this happen again? I had no idea how it happened again. No idea. Nothing bad happened, but I did it again. See, my problem with alcoholism, and one of the issues that I had when the book talks about they can't stop, stay stopped, or moderate, I could stop it for brief periods. 'Cause I had a few periods of stopping briefly, but I always picked up a drink again. And the moment that relapse happened, the phenomenon of craving happened, and I continued to drink. And in the midst of this multiple year run, um, the pain was excruciating. And my best friend from third grade, Kevin, he came to my house one day to get me out of bed. And he said, and he wakes me up and he's like, get out of bed. And I just had a headache and I was drinking all night and I just want to be left alone. Remember those nights. And he said, if you don't get out of bed, I'm going to start, he got a hole puncher. And he said, if you don't get, and at the time I owned a business, and he's like, if you don't get out of bed, I'm going to hole punch every paper in your office. And I'm like, dude, just leave me alone. And all of a sudden, I hear the hole puncher happening, and he's now hole punching all the paperwork in my office, all these professional paperwork that I needed, and he's hole punching everything. And he comes in with a piece of paper, and he said, "What is this?" And it was the very little a bit of information that I had about my biological family. It was the name of the adoption agency, and he said, "Go back to bed." And he wakes me up a few hours later with the website of my adoption agency. And I remember us watching a video of little Spanish kids in Colombia on a swing, and I remember sobbing like a child. And a few months later, as a result of a little donation, some phone calls, and some assistance, I had the opportunity to meet my biological mother from Colombia in active alcoholism. And I was in Atlantic City, and it was arranged the ability to Skype with my biological mom in Colombia. And I'm in Atlantic City. And I get to see my biological mom for the first time. It was the greatest moment of my life, and yet the most painful moment of my life. Here I am thinking that I was finally going to do something that was going to fix something inside of me. Here I am thinking, knowing how much this experience had scarred me and traumatized me as a child. Here I'm thinking that I was going to have this. It was a delusion that once I see my mom and I hear her voice, and that maybe the pain can stop, and maybe I could just not do as much harm to me as I was already doing. Again, I'm self-mutilating daily, chronic anxiety and depression, panic attacks on a regular basis, couldn't check my voicemail, couldn't send out invoices. I was crippled by alcoholism. Physically, mentally, spiritually, I was bankrupt and dying. And I meet my biological mom and I spend that time talking to her for the first time, and it was a bliss that I'll never forget, and yet it was very short-lived. Because a week into the us starting to converse again, I hit the worst pain in my life because I realized this didn't fix me again. And I didn't understand why. Because it should have. I didn't talk to her for years because the pain of talking to her was more than the pain of not talking to her from a self-centered alcoholic. And I continued with my drinking, and my son was born. Chris, he's now 12. And the doctor said, would you like to hold on to your baby? And I said no because I was shaking so hard that I was afraid I was going to drop him. I remember coming home from a bender one day and I started praying next to his crib, asking God to give my son a new dad because I couldn't be the father that he deserved. I was failing Bella, and now I'm gonna fail him, and he's better off without me. And how could a piece like crap like me take care of somebody as precious as him? I hated myself for the drinking that I was doing. And I didn't understand with a history of, at this point, I had purchased my own business. I had I was a high school and collegiate wrestler. I was a high school and collegiate tennis player. If you tell me I can't do something, I will do it and I will do it good. If I can't get through the door, I'll get through the wall. I'm a beast of a human being that has consistently demonstrated a self-will that was second to none. And yet, when it came to my drinking, I was absolutely useless. I could not stop, but I definitely could not stay stopped. And that gift of desperation, that gift of grace that I was given was a pain so excruciating that I went to ask for help because my last drink involved a near car accident and a fear that wasn't sufficient enough to get help and to go to a rehab and to open the door to God's grace and God's love. And I went to my best friend's house and him and my parents set up, some flights and I'm in Florida for a month and a half. And the thing that changed there, because I wasn't sure at that point that I wasn't planning on not drinking. I was just hoping that the pain would go away and maybe I'd learn how to do it better. I don't know what I was thinking at that point. But the moment that changed my life was sitting across the table from a therapist, and he had me close my eyes and he had me picture the person I love more than anything, which is my son. He had me hear his voice, picture his outfit, see those cute little chubby cheeks. Again, he was a year and a half old. And he said, picture your son drinking how you drink. Picture your son burning himself the way you burn yourself. Picture him thinking how you think and feeling how you feel. And if your son was living the life that you were living, what advice would you give him? And I remember thinking, like, once I stopped crying, I told him I would tell him to do whatever it takes to get better. Because I'm cool with hurting me. Again, I was self-mutilating regularly. Pain is weakness leaving the body.
Hello.
You can't hurt me more than I hurt myself. Um, but the thought of my son living that life was a pain I couldn't describe. And it was the beginning, it was the foundation stone for that level of willingness that I will need to get me into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and to get me to, my son didn't get me sober, but that being said, I'll never forget that, throughout my sobriety, I would say, like, what would I tell my son to do? The book talks about, are we willing to go to any lengths? If you want, we have and are willing to go to any lengths. Are you ready to take certain steps? That was that willing to go to any lengths moment. That was that gift of desperation. That was that moment where I realized how sick I was and what would be needed in order for me to get well, to do whatever it takes. And I had left that rehab after a month and a half with an awareness that I'm going to drink again. Because again, I can get sober, I can't stay sober. But I was told to get a sponsor, I was told to get a home group, I was told to get a service commitment. And I remember meeting this guy, George, in like a basement of a meeting. And I didn't know if he had what I wanted. I knew he was smiling. I knew he was kind. I knew he seemed like he knew what he was talking about. He was just a wonderful human being. And quite frankly, I was desperate. And I knew I couldn't stay sober myself. So I asked him to sponsor me in the basement of a meeting and he closed his eyes and he started praying. And I'm like, I closed my eyes and started praying too because I knew I needed help. I knew I was going to drink again. I was a tornado roaring through the lives of others. And as I said, a sober me means I'm going to drink again. And he said yes. And he said, we're going to go through the work and we're going to go through the steps. And one thing he did is, he invited me to family events. He invited me to barbecues. He invited me to his home. We did step work in his home. He showed me how he lived. He showed me that his kids didn't squint when they saw him. He showed me that his kids actually smiled when they saw him, that they loved him. He showed me how he interacts with his wife. He showed me that he had worked. The book talks about the elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of these principles lies in our homes, occupations, and affairs. He had a life worth living, and it was a full life. And he showed me that he was living it. I knew he was applying spiritual principles in his affairs because his affairs were an open book. And as a an alcoholic that has not gone through the steps, I saw something that I wanted. I saw that he had that way of living that was just quite beautiful. Um, and he guided me through the works promptly, and he taught me about the disease of alcoholism. And he told me that we have a physical allergy that causes a phenomenon of craving. He explained to me in the doctor's opinion, about this abnormal reaction to alcohol and had me look at my drinking experience and say, this is my experience? When I drink, can I stop? Can I stay stopped? Can I moderate? Do I have power? Do I have choice? Do I have control? And had me look back at my experience as to how I react when I pick up a drink, and I started to see that I had what this book talks about, a physical allergy and a phenomenon of craving. The book says the phenomenon of craving becomes paramount to all other interests. Paramount means more important. Was that my experience? When it came down to drinking, could I choose to go to school? Could I choose to show up at my kid's birthday party? Could I choose to show up for his birth? Could I choose to show up for my family? Or did I need to pick up a drink? And that was my experience. When it came to alcohol, I cannot drink and choose anything other than alcohol, more than alcohol, because I have what they call a phenomenon of craving, which is abnormal. If you're new here, and you're watching non-alcoholics drink, they don't drink like us. They still don't understand non-alcoholics. They can have a six pack and be completely and utterly satisfied. They can choose not to drink because they're taking antibiotics. I was at the beach house with the family, and when my sister-in-law was like, "Oh yeah, I didn't drink because I'm on antibiotics." I'm like, "What the hell kind of excuse is that?" You know, I don't. I met one of my son's friend's moms, and she said to me that she hasn't drank in a few years. So my AA antennas come up, and I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, "What did you do to stop drinking?" And she starts looking at me weird. And I'm like, "Well, did you do anything?" And she's like what? I'm like, "I don't know, like amends or restitution, or like do you help other people, or are you in any fellowship or support group?" And she's like, "No, why would I need that?" I'm like, "Nope, she's not one of us." Because I am. I don't drink like non-alcoholics. I'm a beast when it comes to drinking, and I've always been. And he explained to me, and this is an abnormal reaction that other people do not have. I have it as a real alcoholic. And he explained to me about the alcoholic thinking. Because I didn't understand that, why I can get abstinent, but I can't stay abstinent. He said, "Well, you have an alcoholic mind." And he explained to me that the main problem center is in our mind rather than our body. Not only do I have this physical reaction to alcohol, which if it was just physical, abstinence would be okay. The book talks about in the doctor's opinion that the only way to not experience this phenomenon of craving is complete abstinence. All I got to do is not drink. And if the only thing that I have is a physical problem, just not drinking would work for me. Not my biggest problem. I got alcoholic thinking. And the book tells me I have strange mental blank spots, which I have a lot of experience with strange mental blank spots. I have a lot of experience with knowing I'm not going to drink and then picking up a drink, saying I'm not going to drink and I pick up a drink, telling my parents I'm never going to do that to them again and I pick up a drink again. What happened? I don't know. Every reason for not drinking is kind of suddenly cast aside. It would happen regularly. And he explained to me this is the alcoholic mind. And then he explained to me about this spiritual malady that's discussed in multiple places of our big book. It talks about the vision for you that you can't imagine your life with alcohol or without it. You'll be at the jumping off point. In Bill's story, it talks about lowering his mattress so unless he jump out the window, which is essentially he's talking about, the fear of like committing suicide. He talks earlier in the book, in that book, in Bill's story, he talks about, would I end my life? Of course not. And now he's starting to get worried about it. And then he's starting to welcome the idea. That was my experience. Dr. Depin talks about being restless, irritable, discontent. Unless I can again experience that sense of comfort, again implies that this is a sober person that comes by taking a few drinks, drinks that other people take with impunity. My restless, irritable, and discontent when I'm abstinent. In We Agnostics, it talks about the bedevilments, being a prey to misery and depression, being full of fear, unhappy. I can't be of real help to others. I can't control my emotional nature. I struggle with personal relationships. This is my demeanor. This is my deportment, whether I'm drinking or whether I'm abstinent. See, I don't get better when I stop drinking. I tend to get worse inside when I stop drinking. I just don't feel right when I stop drinking. I'm just off. And that's why nothing fixes me, because I have this spiritual malady. I find that lack of power is my dilemma. So, am I an alcoholic? Yes, it was my first time realizing that I'm an alcoholic. It seemed like a few people in my life knew I was an alcoholic. I was the last one to pick up on this thing. And when I did step work with my sponsor, I realized that I am an alcoholic, which was I needed to know my diagnosis from needing to find a solution. See, that's the problem. At this juncture, I was diagnosed with borderline personality, clinical anxiety, and depression, and people were giving me treatments that seemed to match what I was diagnosed with, but it was an alcoholism, and it was in the sign of a pill or moral psychology, and those things just weren't working for me. And he told me you have a physical allergy, a phenomenon of craving, a mental obsession, a spiritual malady, and how it works. It says when the spiritual malady is overcome, you're gonna straighten out mentally and physically. Do you believe, or are you willing to believe that the power greater than you can restore you to sanity? That's my solution, a power greater than myself, conscious contact with a power greater than myself. Was I willing to believe in the second step that it was going to restore me to sanity? And the only proof that I had that this thing worked was coming to AA meetings and hearing people share their experience, strength, and hope. But it was like what happened and what it's like today, and seeing the discrepancy with what it was like and what it's like today. I would always wonder how can a drunk like this get the life that they're living? Because they've been restored to sanity. They've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I didn't understand the God thing. It didn't make sense to me. I didn't know it and know which one and know I had a lot of prejudices that needed to be cast aside and set aside. Um, but once I opened my eyes, I could see that people were getting well in these rooms. And that evidence is a sign that something's doing it. Was I willing to have it? Very similar when Abby Thatcher is talking to Bill Wilson, and it's like, I found God. And he says that his whiskey is going to outlast this guy's preaching, and then he's like, well, he's starting to see something different about his old drinking buddy, and he says, did the power originate in him? Of course not. But he saw something different. I was seeing something different in the rooms of AA. I saw people that were stricken by alcoholism but weren't living a life like they were, that are actually better off with their diagnosis and going through the 12 steps. And it inspired me to maybe that if I do what they did, I would get what they got. And that's what the book says: when you want what you have and are willing to go any lengths to get it, then you're ready to go through certain steps. That third step decision for me was a declaration. It was a covenant that I'm going to make with God. It helped me bring, I love reading page 60, 61, and 62 because it's literally like every time I'm restless, irritable, discontent, every time I'm jealous and frustrated, I'm the director running the show, arranging the lights, the ballet, the scenery. If only people did as I wish, the show would be great. I can never, anytime that I'm ever unhappy other than happy, joyous, and free, I'm on 60, 61, and 62. I found out in this third step that I'm selfish, self-centered, self-absorbed, that I'm living a life based on me, that I have turned myself into my own higher power, that self-propulsion was failing me. Because the decision to turn my will and life over the care of God is really, it starts off, the book says the first requirement is any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. So I've been turning my will and life over to self. And how is that paying off? Not too well. Was I willing to reallocate my surrender instead of me running my life to have this power greater than myself run my life? And what does that look like? It looks like, the book says in how it works, the principles we had set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. What would it be like to apply these spiritual principles in my life as a result of this conscious contact with something greater than myself? Is it possible I'm going to be able to have this new employer? That God's going to provide what I need if I keep close to Him and perform His work well. That God is going to, if God is now my director, if God is now the principal and I'm His agent, if God is now my father, that maybe I could start to experiencing the promises that you have if I continue and go through this work. And that third step declaration and covenant for God to be my spiritual power of attorney became abundantly evident because I know that I will fail myself. I know I'm going to drink again. And my experience with the step work is that when I did a fifth step, my life changed. My life got different, significantly different. If you're new here, I encourage you to, when you're struggling, not if, but when, to ask for help. The book says a price must be paid, destruction of self-centeredness. It does not feel good. And I find out in the 12 and 12 that right, pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth. In long version of the acceptance prayer, it says accepting hardships as the pathway to peace. How do I get peace? Well, we're going to give you some hardships, and you're going to take the hardship pathway. Doing a fourth and fifth step was very humbling and yet life altering, all at the same time. I was guided through the big book. I was showed how to do columns. I was showed how to do a resentment inventory, a fear inventory, and a sex inventory, which I was taught that the sex inventory is not about the act of, but more about my relationships and how I've been selfish, self-centered, and self-absorbed, how I've harmed people. And I was taught that this is going to be the foundation of me making amends to somebody else. And I was guided through this work and I was given time restrictions on this and I was given accountability on this. I was not said this is going to take a year and then you go forth. I was told, like, listen, this is what's going to be faster, your disease or your solution. There's a race that's going on. I don't know people that do it too soon. I know a lot of people that don't do it soon enough. That's been my experience. And I'm a sick alcoholic. I needed to do this thing. My sponsor said we're going to start tomorrow. Um, so I'm like, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna open this book and I'm gonna do it right now. And I try to figure out doing a resentment inventory myself, and I called him having a full-blown panic attack about how an awful, person I am. And he started laughing. He's like, did you try your resentment inventory? He's like, yes, yeah, yes, I'm having a meltdown. And he's laughing. He's like, it's funny because I did the same thing. Him and I are cut from the same cloth. And but he guided me through this inventory of unsellable goods, of things that are blocking me off. The book says, though a decision is vital and crucial, the third step, it can have little sufficient force by helping me to stay sober one day at a time, that it can have, it's not enough. It's the third step is not enough. There's things that are blocking me off from a power greater than myself. And as he guided me through this resentment inventory, sex inventory, fear inventory, I used a notebook and he showed me the different columns and we got together for a long talk and we met at the top of a landfill. And we get to this top of the landfill and we had a long talk for a few hours. And the first thing he did was pray and invite God to help us, to give us power. Because that's every problem that I'll ever have. The problem is never a problem. The problem is always lack of power. And I shared with him the first thing he said to me was that he said, share with me the things that you were planning on not sharing with me. Tell me the things that you're planning on not telling me. Ironically enough, I had a sheet of paper of resentments that I was and sex inventory stuff that I was planning on not telling him. And I read it to him. And he said, don't you feel much better? I'm like, I feel awful. But it made the rest of the process a lot easier. And I shared my resentments with him. And we get to this last column, what role or mistake did you played in it? And we looked at things like being molested, being adopted. There was some hard truths that I had to swallow. Understanding what's at stake here. What's at stake here is my son and daughter are going to have a drunk dad. So I had to get very humble and open-minded with some of this stuff. And, we're looking at the molestation, and he said, person, principal institution, person's name, cause, what did he do, molest me? How did it affect me? All areas of self. What role and mistake did I play in it? I had to look at some stuff. Did I ever use this experience to hurt others? Did I harbor the resentment? Did I hate the person and carry hatred in my heart for that person? The book says, though I don't like his symptoms and the way it affected me, was he, like me, sick too? He says, Chris, we're not telling you that this person was right. We're telling you that he was very sick when he did what he did. Is it true that he was possibly spiritually sick? And yes. And he leaves it at that. And we get to my sex inventory, and I start telling him some stuff about my sex inventory. He said, Chris, when we're looking at your sex inventory, is this who you are? And I'm like, no. He's like, would you do this again right now? Would you do these behaviors again right now? I'm like, no. He says, so what you're telling me is that when you're spiritually disconnected, you're willing to hurt some people that you care about. I'm like, yes. He said, that applies to the person that molested you too. It's mercy for all, or grace for all, or justice for all. You choose. We're not telling you what they did was right. We're telling you when they did it, they were very sick. And when you did the things that you did in your sex inventory, you were very sick. But there's a step for that to make restitution. And as you're hoping to get the freedom to move past your past, is it possible that you pray for the freedom for that person that molested you to move past his past? Forgive us our trespasses as I forgive those who trespass against me. Trespasses, I'm starting to move into a space that I shouldn't be. When I'm driven by something other than God, I hurt some people. When they move away from God, they hurt me. Therefore, they are like me, sick too, spiritually sick, spiritually disconnected. The book says, love and tolerance toward all people, even our enemies, for we see them as sick people. And I ended up making an amends to the person that molested me. And I met him at a parking lot, and I knew I had to make amends to him because I hated him. And I was seeing that fear and uncomfortability has been bringing me peace and mind-blowing experiences. So I made the call. I got his phone number, and I made an appointment with him at a parking lot, and I made amends to the person that molested me as a kid. And I said I was wrong for hating him and for taking that pain to other people. And for using an excuse to harm other people. And I was wrong for harboring that. And what could I do to make it up to you? And he said, do you remember what I did to you as a kid? And thank God for good sponsorship. I was told never am I to bring up what they did. I'm going to walk on my side of the sidewalk. And I said, if we talk about this, I'm going to drink again. And my son needs a sober dad. What can I do to make it up to you? And he said, do you mind if we talk for a little bit? And we stayed in the parking lot. We talked. And he started to share with me his experience with being molested by people that should have protected him, should have cared for him. He said, "You're the only person that knows about this. You're the first person I'm telling about this." And he started to share with me about the abuse that he received and the memories that he recollected. And I started to see that he was very much like me, sick. The 10th step of the 12 talks about it's pointless to be hurt by others with the pain of growing up, that other people have been through some stuff as I've been through some stuff. He's not a bad person. See, the problem with my resentments is that I don't resent the behavior. I resent the entire person, as if this behavior makes up everything of who they are. The person, principle, institution is one column. The action is a different column. I've been putting them together. This person does these things. I didn't look at the whole picture. The book says I'm like willing to look at it from an entirely different angle. I started to see a perspective I've never been able to see before, that he was very sick and very wrong and very traumatized and very disturbed. And I didn't like what he did to me, but I got it. And I started crying while he's telling me his story because I felt compassion and empathy towards a person I once hated. See, I think, I remember seeing a therapist, and I said to this therapist, and this therapist dealt exclusively with physical and sexual abuse. I said, "What's the best outcome for this?" And she said, "Acceptance." But you guys tell me something a little bit different. You guys tell me acceptance is a part of it, but you're also going to use your experience to benefit others. That day, this thing started to go away, and as I continued to stay sober, and I started to, instead of being the recipient of people doing the fifth step, I started to be the recipient of other people's fifth steps. I started to see that I could use my experience to benefit some other people. You see, going through the step work, I started to see things differently. I started to be equipped with different facts. I started to see that when I harmed people, I was being driven by something other than God. My defects of character were driving me. Self-centered, self-absorption was guiding me. And as I went through that sex inventory and that fear inventory, I started to see things differently and see people differently. And I started to see that people were like me, sick. And as I continued through the steps, that fourth step became a foundation to what will eventually be the ninth step, amends. The people that I get to make restitution to. As I said, I made amends to the person that abused me as a kid. I made amends to the family, the biological family that I found. I found my biological mom for a week. We talked for a week and I left her. And I get to the ninth step amends process and I put it on paper and what do I do? What's the amendment? What's the changed behavior? Get her on the phone, reestablish a relationship. It's not just about me now. It's about loving and serving her. As a result of this 12-step process, I got the opportunity at 3 years sober to take a trip to the country of Colombia and meet my biological mom. To not use that experience to benefit me, but to use that experience to help them. I didn't go there to fix me. I went there because I have something to offer them. And my goal for that trip was love and service. And keep in mind, my drugs of no choice are alcohol and cocaine. And here I am in the country of Colombia, and the problem's been removed. I didn't have a sponsor up my ass. I didn't have meetings to go to, but I had God within me. Everywhere I go, I have the disease, but everywhere I go, I also have the solution. God is mobile. And if I apply spiritual principles in my affairs, I will have that conscious contact with something greater than me that will enable me not to pick up that first drink. And I spent time, I think about 10 days in the country of Colombia. I was the best man at my biological brother's wedding. I got a chance to meet uncles and cousins, and they were trying to get me to drink. They didn't understand that like I'm alcoholic, so I tried to explain to them that I'm alcoholic, that essentially if I drink this, I'm gonna end up in the jungle of Colombia naked and broken. They'll never see me ever again. My mom understood after a while of me explaining, and she started actually checking my drinks at the wedding, and it was beautiful. As a result of going through this process and making direct amends, I've made restitution. Financial restitution. I paid money that I had no ability to pay, and I started to do things that I was never capable of doing. My family here, my dad calls me one day and he asked me, he says, "I need your help." At the time, I had a few years sober, and I'm like, "What's up?" And he said, "I have a friend dying of alcoholism, and you're the only person I could think of that could help her." And I was able to guide her through the book of Alcoholics Anonymous to watch her recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And what was killing my parents about my behavior, about my disease of alcoholism, is the one thing that serves as an asset to them because they know that I have something to offer. They know that there's a different power within me. Um, Life in sobriety isn't always easy. I've struggled in sobriety. Most of the time, any time I've struggled in sobriety is because I wasn't being obedient to this program. It was not doing an appropriate 10th and 11th step. I love this big book, and I love the big book, and because it gives me a design for living. And if it's a design for living, I'm going to live the design. I should probably know the design. And for my years 2 and 3, I wasn't practicing steps 10 and 11, 84 to 88. I've essentially memorized because I need to do it every single day. So I'm going to need to read it every single day until I memorize it. The more I have, the more I have to give. So I grow, I learn, I listen to YouTube links, I do big book studies, I speak a lot. I'm working on being teachable and helping to teach so that there are times to feed and there are times to be fed, and taking time for that for both of them because I know that alcohol is a subtle foe. As a result of this program, I have a beautiful relationship with my children. I said that I prayed that my son would have a new dad, and today my son has a new dad. My kids pray, meditate with me. They know about God. They know about sponsees. When I'm a little short-tempered, my son says, "Are you being the actor running the show?" He's got quite a little mouth on him, and he must listen to me, and I love it. And I love it. I lately my father got diagnosed with cancer, and he's had some surgeries. And do I pick up a drink? I have work to do, and my work is to love and to serve. I'm seeing that life is impermanent. I'm seeing that loss is inevitable, that change is really inevitable. And as I go through this process, I remember the book says my next function in the 10th step is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And if I'm going to grow, I know that pain may be involved and uncomfortability may be involved. But I know that every time I'm struggling and every time I'm in pain and every time that there's fear, I've been taught something that one way or another I'm going to run to something. When my kids are scared, they run to their dad. When I'm scared, what am I running to? When I run to a power greater than myself, when I run to my relationship with God, when I run to my program, I get to grow in this relationship because this relationship is something that is progressive in nature. As we have a progressive illness and progressive disease, I also have a progressive solution. And that solution is power and power and power. It's courage built on faith and faith built on a relationship. And that's where I'm at today. I am grateful to be alive and sober. I'm grateful to be on the other end of this thing with a very healthy awareness that I have a daily reprieve contingent on maintenance of my spiritual condition. So we got some work to do every day, one day at a time. Thanks for letting me share, guys.